If you went pre-NACS at all, when clearing was still very manual, that was a period when up-country checks would take 21 days or so to clear. And local checks were about 7 days, at a particular point in time. Then enter NACS. And when NACS came, we had local checks reduced to 3 days or so. However, clearing was still manual, so to speak. Manual in the sense that it was still based on two things: logistics and document processing. So logistics at that time, particularly the big banks, they didn't recognize that they were running logistics and courier companies, because the fleet of some of them was larger than, all these courier companies that we even see today. Some banks at that time had more than 100 motorbikes, and some of them, majority of them were doing check runs. The riders would have to take the checks physically. They call them check runners. That's how it used to be before NACS and before check truncation. What the country wanted to do was do NACS, and the technology that they used was called ECP IX, and I will explain. ECP, electronic check processing. Then the IX was to come later, which is the image transfer. But PFS thought otherwise. PFS said our position was very clear that, number one, checks should not be seen as documents, because that was what they were doing, document sorting and processing. But that checks should be seen as financial transactions. If it is a financial transaction, it should be disposed of at the first point of contact. And that's one of the things that you see when you say PFS talks about breaking barriers. We believe that whatever, and that's, you see, you also notice that that's the way this company runs. That any decision that can be taken decisions are taken at the lowest possible level in this company. And that's the same philosophy. Management should be taken at the very first point of contact with the instrument. So PFS developed a software called iTeller. And what iTeller did was to allow checks to be dealt with at the very first point, finally. That nobody needs to see the physical document anymore. And we were fortunate. I salute Access Bank. I salute their visionary stance in 2011, because Access Bank was clearly the bank that made that vision come to reality, because at that time there was no check truncation in Nigeria, but they decided that as a bank, they would work in a truncated environment, even though the country did not have a check truncation system. They were the first bank to then go to clearing and say, okay, fine, all our instruments, we will only present instruments to Lagos. We will still be receiving from other zones, but we will only present everything through Lagos. At that time, that was groundbreaking. And of course, a number of banks didn't like the idea, they criticized it, and the central bank adjudicated. That's, hey, if other banks are flying high-value checks using aircraft, Access Bank is free to fly their own using witchcraft, which is what some people will call technology. That became a game changer. So iTeller was the forerunner of what we have in NIBSS, which is now the NACS. And so when even the central bank saw the efficiency that iTeller presented, then we were able to say, hey, then why on earth do we need to continue certain practices which had become the norms? While they were looking at documents, we were looking at financial transactions. So we are beginning to say, hey, why can't checks also become, well, our vision is instant. Why can't check payments be instant payments? You have to put position that, yeah, checks should be able to clear in near real time. And the arguments resonated with the authorities, both at central bank. Well, it resonated first at NIBSS. NIBSS bought the idea that, yes, what you guys are saying is plausible and can be done. And NIBSS also had the meetings with the authorities and the central bank, and the authorities at the central bank, having confidence in PFS, bought into it and said, let's do it. So we went live in 2017, right? So when you see an industry-wide project, you can't fly at the speed of light, no matter what you want to do, because you have to carry everybody along. And not everybody will assimilate at the same pace. And it was either all in or none in. And on day one, there was a problem. In fact, we'll call it a catastrophe. That, in short, nobody could vouch for the clearing. And of course, one of the challenges is, in fact, the biggest challenge we had was people didn't think a black man or a Nigerian company could do a project of that magnitude and such a, what I would call a novel thing. So that was a huge problem. So you could see there were so many naysayers. Even when I would even sit in the room, and you can understand when I would have to sit in the room with people, you still see them looking at, oh, it's a Nigerian company and stuff like that. So of course, when we had that challenge on day one, oh, all hell was let loose. Oh, the problem is these guys are not competent. Under that, we were not we were even more than competent. What had happened was that the technology that we wanted to use for high availability server failed. And the problem was, once that technology failed, it tries to recover itself automatically. And when it tries to recover itself, it will do it at its own pace. You can't hurry it up. So of course, there was so much noise. So we had to backpedal. And it took 9 months. In short, what we then had to do was to build the resilience of the high availability server into the system itself. It took 9 months for us to, in fact, we rewrote the entire code also just to build for resilience. And we then again prepared for, I think at that time, the volume they were envisaging, I'm trying to remember, the volume at that time was low. I mean, they were doing 30,000. I don't remember the figures. You might remember. I mean, they were doing about 30,000 a day or so. And then they said, oh, you wanted to scale. When we did it, we scaled for 150,000 initially. By the time we were rewriting it, we were able to scale for a system that can do up to 10 million in a day. That was what we had to do. And then we had to program the resilience into it. In any case, 9 months later, exactly September 15, the new solution went live. Had its own challenges. Like I said, the day of the go live, banks still came and said they were not prepared, simply because they didn't want to change. But we had already gone ahead of them. We already knew what their possibilities were, and we'd already prepared. And what many of the banks did not know was that we had already played smarter than them. Because whilst the program said they would go live on a certain date, part of the program said they would have to test 100%, do parallel run on the old system and on the new system for 3 weeks. And we would be able to compare results session by session. They did not know that for us, that was the day of go live. So after they tested 3 weeks, that was no problem. So let's go live. They said, no, let's do another 3 weeks. We had no problem because they do nothing for us. So 3 weeks again, let's go live. That was when some banks came again and said they were not prepared. We were ready for them. We said, oh, if you are not prepared, don't worry. We have a way you can get you prepared. We give them the tool. But what they didn't realize was that it was a do nothing. The day of go live for us was already 6 weeks ago. So by the time the system went live, up till today, that's why we have no hiccup today, of course. And one of the things I'm very proud to say is that if you take a look at all the reports from NIBSS or from all the fraud folder, tech frauds in Nigeria have become zero. And that's something we are so proud of, developed by Nigerians for Nigeria in Nigeria. And one of the things we know in this field is if you have a technology that works in Nigeria, I mean, 2 important markets in the world, Nigeria and India. Works in Nigeria, you can work in India, work anywhere in the world. So that's one of the things PFS is doing today, to say, let's promote this to the rest of the world. That's what we are doing.